We're covering 7 most disturbing true Alaskan missing people stories, and these cases will seriously mess with your head. We're talking about hunters who knew the wilderness, delivery drivers on routine jobs, fishermen who'd worked those waters for years, normal people doing normal things. But then they disappeared. Some left behind clues that make zero sense, footprints that just stop in the middle of nowhere, voices heard calling from empty woods, stuff found in places that's impossible to reach. Others, gone without a single trace. Here's what makes Alaska so terrifying. It's massive, freezing cold, and so remote that you could vanish and nobody would ever find you. And sometimes, the people who went searching, they disappeared too. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because we bring you real cases with no easy answers. These are actual police reports and search missions still open today. Let's begin. My name is Tom Richardson, and I've been working security for 12 years. Started right after high school, got my guard license, and worked my way up from shopping malls to office buildings to industrial sites. I've handled everything from drunk teenagers to break-ins to medical emergencies. I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened during my shift on November 8, 2023, at the Prudhoe Bay oil storage facility in Alaska changed everything I thought I knew about being alone on the job. Some things out there can copy your voice perfectly, and they're hungry for something more than just your attention. I'd been working at the facility for 8 months when this happened. Prudhoe Bay is about as isolated as you can get in America. The nearest real town is Fairbanks, over 400 miles south. During winter, we run a skeleton crew, just 4 people total. There's Bob Martinez, the supervisor who's been up here for 15 years. Steve Collins, our mechanic who keeps the pumps and generators running. Maria Santos, our cook who also handles basic medical stuff. And me, the night security guard. The facility stores crude oil in massive tanks before it gets pumped south through the pipeline. My job is pretty simple. Patrol the perimeter every hour, check all the gates and fences, monitor the camera feeds and radio in any problems. The place is surrounded by 8-foot chain link topped with razor wire. Motion sensors cover the main areas. Cameras watch every entrance and most of the tank farm. During the day, there's usually a dozen workers around. But at night, it's just us 4. November 8th started normal enough. I came on shift at 10 p.m., got briefed by the day guard, and started my first patrol. The temperature was around -20, which is pretty typical for November up here. I had my heavy parka, insulated boots, and my duty belt with radio, flashlight, and keys. Shazas, the northern lights, were dancing across the sky, which always makes the night shifts a little less boring. The facility covers about 50 acres, 6 main storage tanks, each one 3 stories tall and holding millions of gallons of oil. Pump houses, control buildings, the main office where the crew hangs out, and a workshop where Steve fixes things. Everything's connected by gravel roads and metal walkways. It takes me about 30 minutes to do a full perimeter check. At 11 p.m. I was making my second patrol when I heard my own voice calling from the direction of tank number 4. "Tom, come here, I need help." I stopped dead in my tracks. It was my voice. Not similar to my voice, not someone doing an impression. It was exactly my voice, down to my accent and the way I say "here" with that slight Midwestern drawl. I keyed my radio. "Bob, you copy?" "Yeah, Tom, what's up?" "Did you just call for me?" "Nope. Been in the office the whole time. Why?" I looked toward tank 4. The floodlights lit up the area pretty well, but there are always shadows between the pipes and equipment. I heard someone call my name, sounded like they needed help. Could have been Steve or Maria. Want me to check? "Yeah, if you don't mind." I heard Bob's voice over the facility intercom system. "Steve, Maria, either of you need Tom for something?" Steve's voice crackled back. "Negative, I'm in the workshop." Maria answered from the kitchen. "I'm good here, thanks." Bob came back on my radio. "Nobody called for you, man. Maybe the wind played tricks." But I knew what I heard. I walked over to tank 4 anyway, shining my flashlight around the base, checking behind the valve assemblies and pump connections. Nothing. No footprints in the snow except mine from earlier patrols. I tried to shake it off. Isolation does weird things to your mind sometimes. I've worked plenty of solo night shifts. Your brain starts making up sounds and voices when it's too quiet for too long. At midnight, I was checking the main gate when I heard Bob's voice from outside the fence. "Tom, I'm hurt. Unlock the gate." This time I knew something was wrong. I could see Bob through the office window, sitting at his desk, coffee cup in hand. But the voice was coming from about 20 feet to my left, just outside the fence line. "Tom, please, I fell and twisted my ankle. Let me in." I grabbed my radio with shaking hands. "Bob, are you in the office right now?" "Yeah, why?" "Stay exactly where you are. Don't move." I looked at the office window. Bob was looking back at me, phone to his ear. But the voice outside kept talking. "Tom, what's wrong? Just open the gate." The voice was perfect. Bob's slight Puerto Rican accent, the way he always sounds a little tired during night shifts. Even his breathing pattern was right. I shined my flashlight toward the voice. Nothing. Just empty tundra and blowing snow. "Bob," I radioed, "someone's out here copying your voice." There was a long pause. "What do you mean copying?" "I mean something's talking to me in your exact voice, but you're inside." "Tom, are you feeling okay?" I understood why he'd ask. It sounded crazy, but I knew what I was hearing. At 1 a.m., Maria's voice started calling from the kitchen area. "Tom, emergency in here. I need help right now." But when I checked the security monitor, Maria was in the break room, reading a book and drinking tea. I could see her clear as day on camera 3. The voice kept calling, "Tom, someone's hurt. Please come quick." I keyed my radio. "Maria, you copy?" "Yes, Tom, what's wrong?" "Are you in the break room?" "Yes, reading, why?" "Something's using your voice. It's calling for help from the kitchen, but I can see you on camera." Maria's voice came back shaky. "Tom, what are you talking about?" I called all 3 of them to the main office. We sat around Bob's desk, and I told them everything. Bob looked at the security monitors, checking all camera angles. Steve suggested maybe it was radio interference, signals bouncing off the atmosphere. Maria thought maybe I was having some kind of breakdown from isolation. But we agreed on one thing. I wouldn't respond to any voice commands unless I could see the person on camera first. At 2 a.m., Bob's voice came over my radio, ordering me to check the outer perimeter beyond the fence. "Tom, I need you to walk the pipeline access road. Motion sensors picked up something big." I checked the security monitor. Bob was asleep in his office chair. I keyed my radio. "Bob, wake up." Bob stirred and looked at the camera. "What's wrong?" "Something just used your voice to order me outside the fence." Bob sat up straight. "I've been asleep for 20 minutes. That's when I stopped responding to voices entirely. Radio communication only, and only after visual confirmation on cameras. At 3 a.m., things got worse. I was monitoring the cameras when I saw myself walking the perimeter outside. Same parka, same walk, same flashlight technique. I watched my own reflection perform my security duties while I sat frozen in the guard station. The thing that looked like me was doing everything right. Checking gates, shining the light into corners, following my exact patrol route. It even paused at the spots where I always pause, like the broken concrete near Tank 2, where I always step carefully. At 4 a.m., my duplicate approached the main building. On camera, it looked exactly like me. Same face, same height, same everything. It knocked on the door. I locked myself out, it said in my voice. "Can someone let me in?" Steve started getting up to unlock the door. I grabbed his arm. "That's not me. I'm right here." Steve looked confused. Through the window, we could see my double standing at the door, looking cold and frustrated. It had my mannerisms, my way of shifting weight from foot to foot when I'm impatient. But when I looked close at the monitor, I noticed something wrong with its eyes. They reflected the camera's infrared light like an animal's eyes do. Little white dots in the darkness. "Look at its eyes on camera," I whispered to the others. We all stared at the monitor. The eyes definitely had that unnatural shine. Through the window, I watched my double's face change when it realized we weren't going to let it in. The expression shifted from frustration to something else. Something angry, and predatory. For just a second, its face seemed to melt slightly around the edges, like wax getting warm. At 6 a.m., the day shift arrived. 2 trucks pulled up to the main gate. Jake and Tommy, the morning security team, got out and saw my duplicate still standing by the building. They also saw me through the window. Jake radioed in, Bob, we've got 2 Toms out here." The workers gathered outside, looking back and forth between the me inside and the me outside. Both versions looked identical. Both had the same voice, same memories when they asked questions. "What's your wife's name?" Jake asked. "Sarah," both versions answered. "Where'd you grow up?" "Omaha, Nebraska," we both said. "What's your badge number?" "S4471, both of us replied. The crew was getting nervous. Some thought it was a prank, others were freaking out. But I knew something the duplicate didn't. Sarah isn't my wife. She's my ex-girlfriend from 3 years ago. My wife's name is Jessica. I'd deliberately given wrong answers to test if the thing could read my mind. "Ask me about my wife's cooking," I called out. Jake asked both versions. "What's Tom's wife's best dish?" "Sarah makes great lasagna," the duplicate answered confidently. "My wife, Jessica, burns everything she touches, but her mom's pot roast recipe is amazing," I said. The duplicate's face went blank for a moment. Then it smiled, but the smile was wrong. Too wide, too long. "You got me," it said in my voice. Then its face started melting. The skin became loose and waxy. The features shifted and ran together like makeup in the rain. Underneath was she, something pale and smooth, with 2 large black eyes and no real nose or mouth, just slits. The workers backed away as the thing's whole body started changing. It shrank down, bones cracking and reforming. Within seconds, it had turned into an Arctic fox with white fur and black eyes. The fox looked at us for a moment, then turned and ran toward the tundra. It moved wrong, though, too fast and with an unnatural gait. In the distance, I could swear I heard it calling in my voice. "Tom, come here. I need help." I quit that job the next day, moved back to Omaha, got work at a regular office building downtown, normal security work with normal problems. But 6 months later, I started getting phone calls. Always late at night, always the same voice. My voice, calling from numbers that don't exist, saying things I never said. "Tom, come here, I need help." I don't answer unknown numbers anymore. But sometimes, when I'm walking to my car after a late shift, I hear my own voice calling from empty parking lots and dark alleys. The thing is still out there, somewhere in Alaska, still learning, still copying, still hungry for something I don't understand. If you work security anywhere isolated, remember this. If you hear your own voice calling to you from the darkness, don't follow it. Because whatever's out there wearing your face and speaking your words, it's not trying to help you. It's trying to replace you. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've been delivering food for 3 years now. Started with DoorDash when I was 21, right after dropping out of college. Wasn't proud of it, but the money was decent, especially during busy times. I knew every street in Nome, every shortcut, every house that tips well. I delivered to fancy hotels, tiny apartments, even government buildings. Nothing scared me anymore, or so I thought. What happened during the 2024 Iditarod changed everything I thought I knew about my job. Some places aren't meant for the living to visit. The setup. March in Nome means one thing: Iditarod season. The whole town goes crazy. Tourists everywhere, hotels packed, restaurants slammed. For drivers like me, it's like Christmas. I was pulling in $200, $300 a day easy, sometimes more. My girlfriend Sarah kept saying I should save it for college, but honestly, I was thinking about making this full-time. My car was nothing special. A beat-up 2018 Honda Civic with 180,000 miles on it. But it ran good, had decent heat, and the trunk fit plenty of food bags. I kept my phone mounted on the dashboard, always charged, with a backup battery pack. DoorDash app running 24/7. Radio tuned to the local station for weather updates. In Alaska, you don't mess around with weather. The morning of March 12th started normal. Cold as hell, about 15 below, but clear skies. Perfect delivery weather. I'd already done 6 runs by lunch, mostly to the hotels downtown. Easy money. Around 3:30, I was parked outside McDonald's, engine running, scrolling through my phone when the next order popped up. Holy crap, I said out loud. The tip was $50 for a single order. The address showed Cabin 15 Teller Road. I knew Teller Road. It headed west out of town toward the coast. Never delivered out there before, but $50 was $50. The order was simple: 2 burgers, fries, and drinks from the diner on Front Street. Total cost maybe $25. Someone was really hungry or really generous. I accepted the order and headed to the diner. The guy behind the counter, Jimmy, raised his eyebrows when he saw the address. Cabin 15? You sure about that? Yeah, why? He shrugged. Just pretty far out there. Make sure you got gas. I laughed it off. My tank was full, and I had my emergency kit in the trunk. Blankets, water, energy bars. Standard Alaska stuff. I loaded the food into my insulated bag, checked that everything was secure, and headed out. First signs Teller Road starts normal enough. Paved for the first few miles, then turns to gravel. The GPS on my phone showed 8.2 miles to the destination. Not too bad. I'd done longer runs. But as I drove, things felt off. The radio started crackling with static about 2 miles out. I tried switching stations, but they were all fuzzy. Even the emergency channel was coming in broken. Weird, I muttered, adjusting the antenna. Sometimes the mountains messed with signals, but I'd never had problems this close to town. The road got rougher as I went. More potholes, deeper snow on the sides. I passed a few other cabins, but they looked empty. No smoke from chimneys, no vehicles. Just dark windows staring out at the road. My phone GPS started acting up around mile 6. The little blue dot kept jumping around like it couldn't figure out where I was. The estimated arrival time kept changing. First 4:10, then 4:15, then back to 4:08. I slowed down, checking the road signs. There it was. Cabin 15, 0.2 miles. The turnoff was barely visible, just 2 tire tracks in the snow leading into some trees. I hesitated for a second. This didn't look like a place where people lived, but $50 was $50, and I'd driven this far already. I turned in, my Honda bouncing over the rough track. The trees closed in on both sides, making it darker even though it was only 4:15 in the afternoon. My headlights cut through the shadows, showing more snow, more trees, and finally, a cabin. It was small, maybe 20 by 30 feet, with a metal roof and dark wood siding. No lights in the windows, no smoke from the chimney, no car in the driveway. The place looked abandoned. I parked in front, engine running, and checked my phone. The GPS showed I was at the right spot. The DoorDash app was asking me to confirm delivery. But something was wrong, really wrong. There were no footprints in the snow leading to the cabin. None. The snow was fresh from last night's storm and nobody had walked through it, but someone had ordered food. Someone with a working phone. Escalation. I sat in my car for a full minute, debating what to do. The food was getting cold. The customer was probably waiting. But every instinct I had was screaming to turn around and drive back to town. Finally, I grabbed the food bag and got out. The silence hit me immediately. No wind, no birds, no sound at all except my footsteps crunching in the snow. Even the usual noise from my engine seemed muffled. I walked up to the front porch, which was covered but not cleared of snow. That should have been my first real clue. If someone lived here, they'd have cleared the porch. But I was focused on the delivery, on getting my $50 and getting out. I knocked on the door. No answer. Knocked again, louder. Nothing. "Hello?" I called out. "DoorDash delivery?" Silence. I tried the door handle, locked. I walked around to the side windows and peered in. Empty rooms, no furniture, no people, dust on everything. This place hadn't been lived in for years. Back on the porch, I pulled out my phone to call the customer. No signal, 0 bars. That was impossible. I'd had 3 bars just a few minutes ago on the road. I looked at my DoorDash app. It was showing the delivery as confirmed, marked delivered at 4:15 p.m. But I hadn't marked it delivered. The app had done it automatically. That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. There were boot prints on the porch, fresh ones, leading from the steps to the front door. But I hadn't seen anyone. And these prints were bigger than mine. I backed away from the door, food bag still in my hands. This was getting too weird. I needed to get back to my car and figure out what was going on. But when I turned around, my car wasn't where I'd left it. It was about 50 feet away, still running, driver's door wide open. I could see my phone mount on the dashboard, my coffee in the cup holder. Everything exactly as I'd left it, except the car had moved, or I had. I looked back at the cabin, same porch, same door. But somehow, I was standing in a different spot than where I'd started. My hands started shaking. This wasn't possible. Cars don't move by themselves. People don't get disoriented walking 20 feet. I walked back to my Honda, checking over my shoulder every few steps. Got in, locked the doors, cranked the heat. My phone showed 4:20 p.m. I'd been here less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. I put the car in reverse and started backing out. That's when I saw him. A man was standing on the porch where I'd just been. Tall, wearing a delivery uniform. He was holding a food bag. He was placing money on the porch railing, neat and organized, just like any normal delivery. The problem was, the man looked exactly like me. The climax. I slammed on the brakes, staring at the figure on the porch. Same height, same build, same jacket. Even the same Honda Civic was parked where mine had been a minute ago, but mine was right here, under me, engine running. The other me, or whatever it was, finished the delivery and walked back toward the car. He moved wrong, though, too smooth, like he was gliding instead of walking. And when he turned to look in my direction, his face was blank. No expression, no recognition, just empty eyes. I fumbled for my phone to take a picture, but the screen was black. Dead, completely drained even though it had been at 80% when I arrived. The thing that looked like me got into the other car and drove away, disappearing into the trees. I sat there for another minute trying to process what I'd just seen. Then I looked back at the porch. The food was there. The money was there, arranged in neat bills beside a receipt. But there was something else. A note, handwritten. "Thank you for the delivery. We've been waiting." I didn't get out to read it closer. I put my car in reverse and got the hell out of there. The drive back felt wrong from the start. The road seemed longer. The trees looked different. My radio was still static, but sometimes I could hear voices in the white noise. Familiar voices. Sarah's voice. My mom's voice. Calling my name. I drove faster, but the speedometer wasn't working right. It showed 35 mph, then 60, then 15, then 90. All while I kept the same pressure on the gas pedal. Finally, after what felt like an hour, I saw the lights of Nome ahead. Real lights. Real buildings. Real life. I drove straight to the police station. The aftermath fell. Officer Bradley listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Son," he said finally, "you're not the first person to tell me about Cabin 15. He pulled out a file folder. Inside were reports going back 8 years, different delivery drivers, different dates, but always the same story. Orders to Cabin 15, impossible deliveries, people seeing things that couldn't be there. "What is that place, Baz?" I asked. "We're not sure. Been abandoned since 2011. Owner died in a car accident on Teller Road. But every March, during Iditarod week, we get calls about it." He showed me photos from other incidents. Cars found running, doors open, drivers gone. But in my case, I'd made it back. Most didn't. "You're lucky," Bradley said. "Most folks who take orders to Cabin 15 don't come back to tell about it." He advised me to stay away from Teller Road for the rest of the month. Said the state was considering putting up barriers, making the area off-limits during Iditarod season. I never delivered food again. Quit DoorDash that night. Found a job at the hardware store. Indoor work, normal customers, no GPS required. But sometimes, late at night, I get text messages from unknown numbers, usually just coordinates, always the same coordinates. Cabin 15, Teller Road. And sometimes, when I'm driving around town, I see another Honda Civic that looks just like mine. Same dents, same bumper stickers. But when I try to get closer, it turns down a street that doesn't exist, disappearing into parts of Nome I've never seen before. I still live in Nome, still have the same phone number, but I never accept deliveries to addresses I don't recognize. And I never, ever drive west on Teller Road. Some jobs aren't worth any amount of money, some places aren't meant for the living, and some deliveries should never be completed. If you're ever in Nome during Iditarod week and you see an order for Cabin 15 on Teller Road, don't take it. Turn off your app. Go home. Trust me on this. The tip isn't worth what you might find waiting for you in those woods, or what might find you. My name is Robert Chen, and I've been driving school buses in Utqiagvik, Alaska for 12 years. That's longer than most people last up here. The cold gets to you, and the darkness in winter can drive you crazy. But I love this job. I know every road, every trail, every safe spot to pull over when the weather turns bad. The kids depend on me to get them home safe, and I've never let them down, not once. But what happened on October 5th, 2023, changed everything I thought I knew about the ground beneath my wheels. I learned that sometimes the earth itself can become your enemy. October in Utqiagvik is beautiful if you can handle the cold. The northern lights start showing up more often, painting the sky in green and purple waves that dance across the darkness. It's the kind of sight that brings tourists from all over the world. That's how I make extra money during the school year, taking groups out to see the aurora. My old Bluebird school bus might not look fancy, but it's got four-wheel drive and can handle the rough terrain better than those expensive tour vans. The group that night was 8 people from California. They'd paid good money to see the lights from the best viewing spot I knew, a small hill about 10 miles outside town. I'd been taking people there for 5 years. The ground was always solid, even in spring when everything else turned to mud. It was the perfect place to park and wait for the show to start. October 5th was supposed to be perfect for aurora viewing. The weather service said clear skies and strong solar activity. My passengers were excited, talking about their cameras and how they'd never seen the northern lights before. I felt good about the trip. These were the kind of nights that made extra money and helped pay for my daughter's college fund. I picked everyone up at 8:30 p.m. from their hotel. The group was friendly. 2 married couple, Liz in their 50s, a young photographer, and 3 college friends. They were dressed warm and had expensive camera equipment. The photographer, Jake, had even brought a tripod that cost more than I make in a month. The drive out was normal. My headlights cut through the darkness, showing the familiar road that I could drive with my eyes closed. The bus heater was working fine, keeping everyone comfortable. We talked about the best places to see the lights and how long they might last. I told them my usual stories about the biggest aurora displays I'd ever seen. At 9 p.m., I pulled into the viewing area and parked on the flat section of ground where I always stopped. Everyone got out to stretch and set up their cameras. The air was crisp and still, about 15 degrees below zero. Perfect conditions. I kept the bus running to keep it warm. That's standard procedure when you're planning to stay in one spot. The first signs of aurora appeared right on schedule at 9:30. Faint green ribbons started dancing across the northern sky. My passengers got excited, adjusting their cameras and taking test shots. Jake was already snapping photos, his camera flash lighting up the ground around us every few seconds. That's when I first heard it. A soft cracking sound coming from somewhere under the bus. It was quiet, like ice breaking on a pond, but deeper. I'd heard permafrost shifting before. It happens when the temperature changes fast. Usually it's nothing to worry about. The ground in Alaska is always settling and shifting. I figured it was just the permafrost adjusting to the weight of the bus. At 10 p.m., the real show started. Brilliant green and purple lights exploded across the entire sky, moving and dancing like living things. My passengers were cheering and taking pictures as fast as their cameras could shoot. It was one of the best displays I'd seen all year. Everyone was having the time of their lives. Then I heard a much louder crack. The bus tilted slightly to the left, just a few degrees, but enough that I felt it in my seat. The engine was still running fine, but something was wrong with the ground underneath us. "Everyone back on the bus," I called out. "We need to move to a different spot." My passengers started packing up their equipment, but they were taking their time. They didn't understand the urgency. To them, it was just a minor adjustment. They'd paid for 2 hours of aurora viewing, and the show was just getting good. Jake was the closest to the bus when it happened. As he stepped onto the bottom step, the ground under his feet just disappeared. 1 second he was there, the next second he was falling into a black hole that opened up like a hungry mouth. His scream echoed from 20 feet down. Then Sarah, one of the college girls, tried to run toward the bus. The earth gave way beneath her feet too. She fell right after Jake, her voice joining his in the darkness below. I grabbed my radio to call for help, but as I looked around I could see more cracks spreading across the ground like a spider web. The permafrost wasn't just shifting, it was collapsing. Years of warming temperatures had created huge empty spaces underground, and now they were all caving in at once. The remaining 6 passengers scrambled onto the bus, but we were trapped. Behind us, the road we'd driven in on had collapsed into a deep trench. In front of us, more holes were opening up every minute. We were sitting on a small island of ground that was getting smaller and smaller. "What's happening?" asked one of the wives, her voice shaking. "Climate change," I said, though I could barely believe it myself. "The permafrost is melting from underneath. It's creating cavities that can't support weight anymore." Tom, one of the husbands, had a satellite phone. He managed to get through to the Coast Guard and explained our situation. I could hear the rescue coordinator asking for our exact location. Tom read off the GPS coordinates from his phone screen. At 11 p.m., our small island of stable ground finally gave way. The bus tilted forward and slid into a crater that opened up right under our front wheels. We fell 30 feet, the bus crashing down nose first with a sound like thunder. The impact threw everyone forward, but the old Bluebird was built tough. The frame held together, and somehow we all survived. But now we were at the bottom of a deep hole, and more earth kept falling down on top of us. The aurora was still dancing overhead, but we could barely see it through the opening that was getting smaller every minute. I found an air pocket near the back of the bus where we could all breathe. The heater was still working, thank God, so we weren't freezing. But I could see that our space was shrinking as more dirt and rocks fell from above. Tom's satellite phone still had signal. He sent our new GPS coordinates to the Coast Guard before the battery died. We could hear helicopters overhead, but they couldn't see us. The collapse had buried our bus completely under tons of earth. The rescue teams on the ground couldn't reach us either. Every time they tried to get close, more ground would collapse. It was like the earth itself was fighting against them. As the hours passed, I realized what was really happening. This wasn't just bad luck or a freak accident. The warming climate had been slowly melting the permafrost for years, creating a network of underground cavities that nobody knew about. Our bus had been the final weight that triggered a massive collapse. At 2 a.m., I heard voices and machinery above us. The rescue team was using ground-penetrating radar to locate exactly where we were buried. They'd brought in specialized mining equipment that could dig down to us without causing more collapses. We were 40 feet underground by then, trapped in what was left of my bus. The air was getting thinner, and I could tell that some of my passengers were struggling to breathe. I kept talking to them, trying to keep everyone calm and awake. At 4 a.m., I heard drilling sounds directly above us. The rescue team had reached us, but it was almost too late. 5 of my passengers had already passed out from lack of oxygen. By the time they pulled me out, I was the only one still conscious. Jake and Sarah, who fell into the first sinkhole, were found alive but injured. The specialized rescue team managed to reach them too, but the others didn't make it. The collapse had been too fast, and there wasn't enough air to keep everyone alive. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital with broken ribs and lung damage from breathing dust and limited oxygen. When I got out, the company offered me a desk job, but I couldn't take it. Every time I sat in the driver's seat of a bus, I could feel the ground shifting underneath me. The investigation showed that climate change had been weakening the permafrost for decades. What happened to us was just the beginning. Scientists predict that more collapses will happen as the Earth continues to warm and the frozen ground melts. I don't drive buses anymore. I work at the airport now where the ground is solid concrete. But sometimes, late at night when the northern lights are dancing, I think about that October evening. I remember how beautiful it looked right before the Earth opened up and swallowed us whole. The company still runs Aurora tours, but they don't go to that viewing spot anymore. The whole area has been marked as unstable. Sometimes I drive past it on my way to work, and I can see where the Earth has continued to collapse. The hole is even bigger now, and the ground around it keeps cracking. If you ever take a tour to see the northern lights in Alaska, ask your driver about the ground conditions. Ask them how long they've been using that viewing spot. Because the Earth up here isn't solid anymore. It hasn't been for years. And when the permafrost finally melts completely, we're all going to find out what's been sleeping underneath our feet all this time. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been working construction for 11 years. Started right after high school, learning the trade from my uncle who ran a small crew in Anchorage. I got my heavy equipment license when I was 22, and I've operated everything from mini excavators to those massive Caterpillar dozers. I've worked on apartment buildings, shopping centers, and dozens of housing developments across Alaska. The pay is good, the work keeps you strong, and there's something satisfying about building something that'll last. I thought I'd seen everything that could go wrong on a job site. Cave-ins, equipment failures, accidents that make your stomach turn. But what happened on July 18, 2023, in Eagle River changed everything I thought I knew about what lies beneath the ground we build on. Some things should stay buried. The Eagle River Estates project was supposed to be routine, just another subdivision going up on the north side of town. 32 houses on quarter-acre lots. The developer wanted them finished before winter, which gave us a tight schedule, but nothing we couldn't handle. I was running the Caterpillar 320 excavator, the workhorse of our operation. Been using that machine for 3 years, knew every lever and hydraulic system by heart. Our crew was 8 guys total. Tommy Vasquez was the foreman, been doing this for 25 years and never missed a deadline. We had 2 other equipment operators, 3 laborers, a surveyor, and me. The routine was always the same. Mark the lot boundaries, clear any vegetation, then start digging foundations. Each house needed a basement dug 8 feet deep, perfectly square, with concrete footings poured exactly to spec. The soil in Eagle River is usually pretty standard for Alaska, mostly glacial till mixed with some clay, decent drainage, easy to work with. We'd started the project 2 weeks early, and already finished 12 lots without any problems. The weather was perfect that week, sunny and 70 degrees, which is about as good as it gets in Alaska during summer. Lot 15 was positioned right in the middle of the development, same size and layout as all the others. When I fired up the Cat that morning, everything felt normal. Engine ran smooth, hydraulics responsive, tracks gripping the ground just right. I'd been operating heavy machinery long enough to feel when something was off, and that morning, everything seemed perfect. Tommy gave me the signal to start digging at exactly 8 a.m. That's when I first noticed something weird. The bucket went into the ground easier than it should have. Way easier. On the other lots, I had to really work to break through the packed earth, especially that first few feet. But on Lot 15, the bucket sank in like I was digging through loose sand. I figured maybe there'd been some kind of drainage issue, or maybe the city had done some utility work years ago and backfilled with softer material. Happens sometimes. So I kept digging, but I had to slow down because the excavator was sinking deeper with each scoop than my controls were telling it to. By 10 a.m., I was only 4 feet down, but something was definitely wrong. The dirt coming up looked normal enough, brown soil mixed with some rocks and roots. But the way it felt through the machine was all wrong. It was like the ground had already been dug up before, like I was just re-excavating an old hole. Tommy came over around noon to check my progress. "You're behind schedule, Jake. What's the holdup?" "Something's not right with this dirt," I told him. "It's too soft. Feels like it's already been worked." He grabbed a handful of the soil I'd pulled up and examined it. "Looks normal to me. Maybe there's an old septic system or something. Keep digging, but go slow. Last thing we need is to hit a gas line that's not on the maps." That's when I should have stopped. Should have insisted we call the city engineers first, or at least use the ground-penetrating radar. But we were behind schedule, and Tommy was right. The dirt looked completely normal. It was just the feel of it that was wrong. I kept digging. By 2 p.m., I was down about 7.5 feet when it happened. The bucket broke through into empty space. I felt it immediately. That sickening drop when your equipment suddenly has nothing supporting it. The entire front end of the excavator lurched forward and down, and for a second I thought the whole machine was going to tip into whatever hole I'd just opened up. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, heart pounding. In 11 years of construction work, I'd never broken through into a void that big. Small pockets, sure. Old tree roots, maybe a buried septic tank. But this felt massive. Tommy came running over when he saw me shut down. "What happened?" "Hit some kind of cavity?" I called down to him. "Big one." He climbed up to the cab to look. Down in the foundation hole, you could see where my bucket had punched through. There was a dark opening, maybe 3 feet across, and cold air was rising out of it. Not just cool air, actually cold, like it was coming from deep underground. "Get your flashlight," Tommy said. "Let's see what we're dealing with." I always kept a heavy-duty mag light in the cab, one of those police-issue ones with the Sirius beam. I climbed down into the foundation and shined the light into the hole my bucket had made. What I saw didn't make sense. It wasn't a septic tank or a storm drain. It was a tunnel, a perfectly round tunnel, maybe 6 feet across, with smooth walls that looked almost polished. The beam of my flashlight disappeared into darkness in both directions. "That's not on any of the utility maps," Tommy muttered. He'd been doing construction in Anchorage for decades and knew every pipe and cable that ran under the city. "This isn't supposed to exist." The walls of the tunnels were too smooth, too perfect. They looked almost carved, like someone had used some kind of boring machine to cut through the earth. But the finish was wrong for any equipment I knew about. It was more like the walls had been worn smooth by something moving through them over and over again. Tommy called the city engineers from his truck. Took them 40 minutes to get to the site, and another hour for them to run through every utility map and survey record they had. Nothing. No record of any tunnel or drainage system in that location. No construction permits. No abandoned infrastructure. Nothing. "We need to explore it," the lead engineer said. "Figure out what we're dealing with before we can proceed with construction." That's when I made the mistake that almost cost me my life. I volunteered. "I'll go down," I said. "I'm the smallest guy on the crew, and I've got experience with confined spaces." It was true. I'd taken the confined space training required for some of the industrial jobs. I knew how to use safety harnesses, breathing equipment, emergency communication, and honestly, I was curious. In 11 years of digging holes, I'd never seen anything like this tunnel. Tommy wasn't happy about it, but the engineers needed someone to go down and assess the situation before they could make any decisions about the construction project. We rigged up a safety rope system, gave me a radio headset, and I strapped a small video camera to my hard hat. 15 minutes max, Tommy said as I clipped into the harness. "You see anything dangerous, you come right back up." I lowered myself through the hole into the tunnel. The temperature drop hit me immediately. It had to be at least 20 degrees cooler down there. My breath was fogging in the beam of my flashlight, and the cold seemed to be coming from deeper in the tunnel system. The tunnel was exactly as smooth as it had looked from above. When I ran my hand along the wall, it felt almost slippery, like it had been polished with oil or wax. But there was no smell, no obvious signs of what had made it so smooth. I started walking east, playing out the safety rope behind me. The tunnel ran straight for about 100 feet, then curved slightly to the north. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was being absorbed by the walls. That's when I noticed the scratches. At first, I thought they were just natural wear marks from whatever had smoothed the tunnel walls. But when I got my flashlight closer, I could see they were too regular, too deliberate. They looked like claw marks, deep gouges in the stone, running parallel to each other in sets of 3 or 4. Each mark was about an inch deep and maybe 8 inches long. Whatever had made them was big, bigger than any animal I knew about. I called Tommy on the radio. "You getting this video feed?" "Yeah, we can see it. What do you think made those marks?" "I don't know, but it was something with serious claws." I kept walking, following the tunnel as it curved and branched. The scratch marks got more frequent the deeper I went, and some of them looked fresh, recent, like whatever had made them was still using this tunnel system. That's when I found the first bone. It was just a small piece, maybe 2 inches long, white and clean. I almost walked past it before my brain registered what I was looking at. Human finger bone. I stopped and played my flashlight around more carefully. There were more pieces scattered along the tunnel floor. Rib fragments, pieces of skull, what looked like part of a femur. All of them picked clean, with no tissue or clothing remaining. "Tommy, we've got a problem down here." "What kind of problem?" "Human remains, lots of them." The radio crackled with static for a moment before Tommy's voice came back. "Are you sure?" I was sure. I'd seen enough hunting accidents and construction site fatalities to recognize human bones. And there were a lot of them. More than could come from just one or 2 people. I followed the tunnel for another 50 feet until it opened into a larger chamber. When I played my flashlight around the space, I had to fight to keep from throwing up. The chamber was huge, maybe 30 feet across and 15 feet high, and the floor was covered with bones, hundreds of them. Skulls, rib cages, arm and leg bones, all jumbled together like they'd been dragged there and dumped. I started backing toward the tunnel entrance, but that's when I heard it. Scratching sounds, coming from one of the other tunnel entrances across the chamber. Slow, deliberate scratching, like something with claws was moving across stone. The sounds were getting closer. I turned off my flashlight and tried to move quietly back toward my safety rope, but the scratching sounds changed direction. Whatever was making them had heard me. I keyed my radio and whispered, "Tommy, something's down here. Something's coming toward me. Get out of there. Now." I turned my flashlight back on and started moving as fast as I could through the tunnel, but I could hear something big following behind me. Not footsteps. More like a wet, sliding sound, like something without legs was pulling itself along the tunnel floor. The sound was getting closer. Much closer. I reached the rope and started climbing, but when I looked back down the tunnel, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was a creature in the tunnel behind me, something huge and pale, maybe 12 feet long, moving like a massive worm or slug. It had no eyes that I could see, but it was definitely following my scent or heat signature. The front end of the thing reared up when my flashlight hit it, and I could see rows of teeth arranged in a perfect circle around what looked like a mouth. The teeth were sharp and curved inward, designed for gripping and tearing. I scrambled up the rope as fast as I could, but the creature was moving faster than something that size should have been able to. By the time I reached the surface, I could hear it directly below the opening. Tommy and the other guys hauled me out of the hole, and we all backed away from the opening. For a few seconds, we could hear scratching and scraping sounds coming from down in the tunnel, like the creature was trying to figure out how to follow me up. Then everything went quiet. I was covered in some kind of slime that must have come from the creature. It was clear and sticky, and it was starting to burn my skin through my work clothes. Tommy drove me to the hospital while the others called the police and the state wildlife department. The slime turned out to be some kind of acid. Not strong enough to kill me, but it burned through my work shirt and left permanent scars on my arms and chest. The doctors said it was probably digestive fluid, like what you'd find in a stomach. The police investigation found the remains of 23 people in the tunnel system. All of them had been missing persons from Anchorage over the past 5 years. The tunnels connected to the storm drain system with openings under sewer grates throughout the city. The creature had been hunting people for years, pulling them down through storm drains and dragging them back to its lair to feed. The city sealed all the tunnel entrances they could find and posted warnings throughout the storm drain system. But they never found the creature. I couldn't go back to construction work after that. The nerve damage from the acid burns made it too painful to operate heavy machinery for more than a few minutes at a time. I work in a hardware store now, and I live in a second-floor apartment with no basement. Sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching sounds under buildings. Other people hear them too. There are posts about it on local Facebook groups and neighborhood watch forums. The city says it's just settling foundations or small animals in the crawl spaces. But I know better. That thing is still down there, and it's still hunting. If you're ever in Anchorage and you hear scratching sounds coming from under the ground, don't investigate. Just walk away. Some things should stay buried. My name is Lisa Chen, and I've been driving taxi for 12 years here in Juneau, Alaska. I started when my daughter Emma was just 3 years old. Her dad left us, and taxi driving was one of the few jobs that let me work nights while she slept. The money isn't great, but it pays the bills, and I know these streets better than anyone. I've seen everything in this job. Drunk tourists who can't find their cruise ship, locals who need rides to the hospital at 3 a.m., fight couples screaming at each other in my back seat. I've had people throw up, pass out, and try to skip out without paying. I thought I'd handled every type of passenger you could imagine. I was wrong. What happened on September 14th, 2023 changed everything I thought I knew about this job. It made me realize that some passengers aren't passengers at all, and some rides don't end where they're supposed to. September 14th started like any other night. It was cold, even for Alaska in September. The temperature had dropped to about 35 degrees, and there was that bite in the air that meant winter was coming fast. I'd been driving since 8 p.m., mostly picking up people from the bars downtown. My taxi is a 2018 Ford Crown Victoria. Nothing fancy, but it's reliable. The heater works, the radio picks up all the local stations, and the GPS usually gets me where I need to go. I keep it clean because people judge you by your car. A dirty taxi means lower tips. The Alaskan Hotel sits right in the heart of downtown Juneau. It's an old building, built back in 1913. The lobby has dark wood and old paintings, and it always smells like coffee and cleaning supplies. I pick up fares there all the time. Hotel guests going to the airport, or heading out to dinner, or just exploring the city. At exactly 2 a.m., my dispatch radio crackled to life. "Lisa, you got a pickup at the Alaskan Hotel. Customers waiting outside." "Copy that," I said, and drove the 3 blocks over. When I pulled up, I saw an elderly woman standing by the hotel entrance. She was wearing a heavy winter coat, dark blue and puffy, the kind tourists buy when they realize Alaska is colder than they expected. She had gray hair and looked to be in her 70s. Nothing unusual about that. Lots of older folks stay at the Alaskan. I rolled down my passenger window. "You need a taxi?" She nodded and got in without saying anything. The dome light came on when she opened the door, and I got a good look at her face. Pale skin, deep-set eyes, thin lips. She looked tired, like she'd been traveling all day. "Where to?" I asked. "Douglas," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. 2247 Cottage Avenue. Douglas is across the Gastineau Channel from Juneau. You have to take the Douglas Bridge to get there. It's about a 15-minute drive, depending on traffic. At 2 a.m., the roads would be empty. I put the car in drive and started heading toward the bridge. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. She never blinked. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, and she was just staring straight ahead, not looking out the windows at the city lights, not checking her phone, not doing anything, just staring. And I never saw her blink once. People blink. It's automatic. Even when you're tired, even when you're zoned out, you blink. But not her. I told myself she was probably just exhausted. Maybe she'd been traveling for hours and was running on no sleep. Some people get that 1,000-yard stare when they're really tired. But it bothered me. Then I noticed something else. In my rearview mirror, she looked different than when I glanced back at her directly. When I turned around and looked at her with my own eyes, she looked like a normal, elderly woman. Gray hair, wrinkled skin, tired eyes. But in the mirror, she looked younger. Her skin was smoother, almost pale white. Her hair looked darker, and her eyes. In the mirror, her eyes looked completely black. I blinked hard and looked again. Direct view. Elderly woman. Mirror. Young woman with black eyes. Must be the streetlights, I said to myself. Sometimes the way light hits the mirror can play tricks on you, especially at night with all the sodium lights and LED streetlights around the city. They can make colors look weird. We were approaching the Douglas Bridge when she spoke again. "Stop at the scenic overlook," she said. "There's a small parking area about halfway across the bridge where people can pull over and look at the water. It's popular during the day with tourists who want to take pictures. At night, it's usually empty." "The overlook?" I asked. "I thought you wanted to go to Cottage Avenue." "I want to see the water," she said. That's when I noticed her voice sounded different. It still sounded like an old woman, but there was something underneath it, like there were other voices mixed in, all talking at the same time, but so quiet you could barely hear them. I pulled into the overlook and stopped the car. The water was dark and choppy below us. You could hear it hitting the rocks, even through the closed windows. "Here we are," I said, turning around to face her. The passenger seat was empty. I stared at the empty seat for a full 10 seconds, thinking I was losing my mind. The door hadn't opened. I would have heard it, and the dome light would have come on. The windows were all closed and locked, but she was gone. I got out and checked the entire car. I looked under the seats, in the trunk, everywhere. No one. But on the passenger seat, folded neatly, was her coat. I picked it up and immediately dropped it. The coat was freezing cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer for hours, and it smelled terrible. Like fish that had been left out in the sun for days. Rotting fish and something else I couldn't identify. Something sour and wrong. I grabbed the coat with a towel from my emergency kit and threw it in the trunk. I had to get out of there. I drove straight to 1247 Cottage Avenue in Douglas. When I got there, I found an empty lot. No house, no building, nothing. Just weeds and a for sale sign that looked like it had been there for years. By 3 a.m., I was sitting in the police station trying to explain what had happened. The desk sergeant, Officer Rodriguez, listened patiently while I told him about the disappearing passenger. "Sounds like an elderly person with dementia," he said. "They wander off sometimes, get confused about where they are. She probably got out when you weren't looking and is walking around somewhere." I tried to explain that the doors never opened, but he just nodded and took down my report. Standard missing person protocol. They'd keep an eye out for an elderly woman walking around at night. I went home and tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about that voice. Those multiple voices all mixed together. And the way she looked different in the mirror. The next night, September 15th, I was back at work. I needed the money, and I figured whatever happened was just one of those weird things that sometimes occur in this job. At 2:15 a.m., my radio crackled again. "Lisa, pick up at the Alaskan Hotel." My blood went cold. Did they request me specifically? "Nope, you're just the closest unit." I drove to the hotel hoping it would be a normal passenger, a drunk tourist or a business traveler heading to the airport. But there she was, standing in the exact same spot, same coat, same posture, same everything. This time, I watched her carefully as she got in. In the rear-view mirror, I could see her reflection getting into the car. But when I looked directly at her, I realized something horrible. She had no reflection at all. The mirror showed empty space where she should be sitting. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Where to?" "Take me to the water again," she said, eyed in that multi-voice tone. Up close, I could see her skin looked wrong. It was too smooth, too perfect, like it was made of rubber or plastic stretched over something else. And her eyes weren't focusing on anything. They were just staring ahead at nothing. "No," I said. "I'm not going to the bridge. Tell me where you really want to go or get out of my car." She turned her head toward me for the first time. As she did, her face started to change. Her features began melting and reforming like wax under heat. Her nose became smaller, then larger. Her mouth stretched wider than any human mouth should go. "You can't make me leave," she said. But now she was speaking in my own voice. Exactly my voice, with my accent, my tone, everything, like she was mimicking me perfectly. I slammed on the brakes and reached for my door handle, but the thing wearing the woman's appearance lunged at me across the front seat. Its face was still changing, features sliding around like they weren't attached to anything solid underneath. I swerved hard to the right to avoid it, and we hit the guardrail on the side of the road. The impact wasn't hard enough to deploy the airbags, but it was enough to throw the creature off balance. When I looked up, it was gone. Not through the door, not through the window. It just disappeared like smoke. I sat there shaking for I don't know how long. Eventually I heard sirens. Someone had seen the accident and called 911. The paramedics checked me out while the police looked at my car. Officer Rodriguez was there again. "Passenger door is still locked from the inside," he told me. "How did your fare get out?" I didn't even try to explain this time. I just said I swerved to avoid hitting a deer, but the next day I got a call from Officer Rodriguez. He sounded confused. "Lisa, we reviewed the security footage from the Alaskan hotel. The camera shows your passenger getting into your taxi at 2:15 a.m. "Okay," I said, "but it also shows the same woman entering the hotel lobby at exactly 2:15 a.m. at the exact same time." I didn't know what to say to that. "We checked with the hotel," Rodriguez continued. "A woman matching that description was found dead in room 237 3 years ago. Margaret Olson, age 73. She drowned in the bathtub. The hotel staff found her body 3 days later." I hung up the phone and sat down hard in my kitchen chair. That evening, I drove to the TRUE Alaska Heritage Institute and asked to speak with Thomas Anderson, a Tlingit elder I'd given rides to before. Thomas knows all the old stories, the traditional beliefs that most people have forgotten. I told him everything that had happened. When I finished, Thomas was quiet for a long time. "Kushtaka," he finally said. "What's that?" "Shape-shifting otter spirit. Very old, very dangerous. They take the form of dead people to lure victims to the water. Once you're in the water with them, you drown, and they take your spirit energy to become stronger. Why would it target taxi drivers? Because you go where people tell you to go. You trust your passengers, and you drive alone at night." Thomas shook his head. "It's the perfect hunting ground for a kushtaka." He leaned forward. "Lisa, you need to be very careful. Now that it knows you can see through its disguise, it will try harder. It wants you specifically now." Over the next week, I did some research. I called taxi companies in other parts of Alaska and asked if any of their drivers had reported strange passengers. What I found out made my blood run cold. 8 other taxi drivers had reported picking up the exact same elderly woman over the past 3 years. All of them described the same thing: a woman wanting to go to the water, strange voices, and then disappearing from a locked car. 7 of those drivers had quit the taxi business within a month of the incident. The 8th driver, Robert Hayes from Anchorage, had disappeared completely. His taxi was found empty at a scenic overlook near the Nick River. The passenger door was locked from the inside, and his body was never found. I quit driving taxi the next day. I now work the morning shift at a coffee shop downtown. Normal hours, normal customers, normal everything. I don't work nights anymore, and I don't drive strangers around the city. But sometimes, when I'm walking to my car after work, I catch a glimpse of an elderly woman in a dark blue coat standing near the Alaskan hotel. She's always just at the edge of my vision, and when I turn to look directly, she's gone. Thomas told me that once a kushtaka marks you, it never really gives up. It just waits for the right opportunity. So I stay away from the water at night. I don't drive alone after dark, and I never, ever pick up hitchhikers. Because some passengers aren't looking for a ride to their destination. They're looking for someone to take with them to the bottom of the channel. If you're a taxi driver or an Uber driver or anyone who gives rides to strangers, be careful who you let in your car. Look at them in your rear-view mirror. Make sure their reflection matches what you see with your own eyes. And if they ask you to take them to the water, don't go. Just drive away as fast as you can. Some fares aren't worth the money. My name is David Chen, and I've been delivering mail for the United States Postal Service for 8 years. I started right after college in Seattle, then moved up to Alaska 3 years ago when my wife got a job at the hospital in Ketchikan. It's a good job, steady pay, decent benefits, and I like being outside instead of stuck in an office all day. I've handled everything from angry dogs to blocked roads to packages that weigh more than I do. I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened in late May 2023 on my rural delivery route changed everything I thought I knew about my job. Something was watching me from those forests, something that shouldn't exist. Ketchikan sits on the southern tip of Alaska, surrounded by thick forests and mountains. My route covers the rural areas outside town, mostly logging roads that snake through the wilderness to reach isolated cabins and houses. Some of these places are so remote that GPS doesn't work properly, and cell service cuts out completely once you're more than 5 miles from the main highway. My mail truck is a standard LLV, long life vehicle, one of those white Grumman trucks you see everywhere. It's got 180,000 miles on it and makes weird noises, but it's reliable. The thing was built like a tank back in 1987. I carry the usual gear: mail bags, packages, a handheld scanner for tracking deliveries, bear spray, required in Alaska, and a first aid kit. The route takes about 6 hours to complete on a normal day. Most of my customers are great people. Retired folks, families who wanted to get away from city life, some writers and artists who like the quiet. Then there are the true off-grid types who barely tolerate having mail service at all. They only get deliveries twice a week because their roads are so rough. Pine Ridge Road is the farthest point on my route, about 40 minutes from town on a winding dirt road that follows an old logging trail. Only 3 houses out there, all spread at least a mile apart. The Hendersons live in the first house, the Kowalskis in the second, and old Mr. Garrett lives alone at the very end. His place is so isolated that I'm usually the only person he sees all week. The weather in May was typical for southeast Alaska: rainy, muddy, and cool. The trees were just starting to get their full summer leaves, making the forest thick and dark. Perfect conditions for something to hide in the shadows and watch you without being seen. May 22nd started like any normal Tuesday. I grabbed my coffee at the post office, loaded up the truck, and headed out around 9 a.m. The Henderson house was my first stop on Pine Ridge Road. Mrs. Henderson had a package from her daughter in California, and I always enjoyed chatting with her for a few minutes. I parked next to their mailbox and got out to grab the package from the back. That's when I noticed the footprints in the mud beside the road. They were huge, at least 18 inches long and shaped like human feet, but way bigger than any person I'd ever seen. The prints were deep too, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. I knelt down to get a better look. They were definitely bare feet. You could see the outline of toes and everything, but they were massive. I wear size 11 boots, and these prints made my feet look tiny. The weird thing was how clear they were. It had rained the night before, so the mud was soft and perfect for showing details. Mrs. Henderson came out to get her mail and saw me looking at the tracks. "Oh, those," she said with a laugh. "Tom thinks it's some of the logging crew boys playing pranks. You know how they get when they're bored." Tom was her husband, retired from the Forest Service. I stood up and brushed the mud off my knee. "Pretty elaborate prank," I said. "These look real," she shrugged. "Kids these days have too much time on their hands. Probably made some kind of fake feet to mess with people." I delivered her package and got back in my truck, but I couldn't stop thinking about those prints. The spacing between them suggested something walking upright, but the stride was way longer than a normal person's, and the depth meant whatever made them had to weigh at least 300 pounds. The next day, Wednesday, I found more tracks. This time they were at the Kowalski place, right next to their mailbox. Same huge footprints, same impossible depth in the mud. But these ones were different. They led from the tree line straight to the mailbox, then back into the forest. Mr. Kowalski wasn't home, so I couldn't ask him about it. But I took pictures with my phone this time. When I got back to the post office, I showed them to my supervisor, Janet. "Probably just some local kids messing around," she said, barely glancing at the photos. "You know how people get about mail carriers. They think we're easy targets for pranks. But I'd been doing this job for 8 years. I knew what prank footprints looked like. These were different. The weight distribution was wrong for fake feet, and the toe marks showed real grip in the mud. Something had actually stood there. Thursday brought more tracks, this time at Mr. Garrett's place at the end of Pine Ridge Road. But these prints weren't just by the mailbox, they circled his entire property. I followed them partway around his cabin and counted at least 20 separate footprints in a rough circle about 50 feet from his house. Mr. Garrett was working in his garden when I delivered his Social Security check. He's in his 70s, lived alone since his wife died 5 years ago. Sharp as a tack, though. "You see those tracks?" I asked him. He looked up from his tomato plants. "Been seeing them for 3 days now. Appears every morning after you leave. Whatever it is knows your schedule." That sent a chill down my spine. "You think it's following my route?" "Son, I've lived in these woods for 31 years. I know what every animal around here sounds like and what their tracks look like. This ain't no animal I ever seen, and it's definitely watching you." Friday, May 25th was when everything changed. I was making my delivery to the Henderson place when I saw it. I just put their mail in the box and was walking back to my truck when movement in the tree line caught my eye. Something tall was standing about 60 feet away, partially hidden behind a massive pine tree. At first I thought it was a person, maybe one of the loggers Mrs. Henderson mentioned. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized how wrong I was. The thing was huge, at least 9 feet tall and covered in dark brown hair or fur. It had a human-like shape, but everything was wrong. The proportions were off, the shoulders too broad, the arms too long. And it was watching me. When I turned to look directly at it, the creature stepped sideways behind the tree and vanished. Just like that. I stood there staring at the tree line for a full minute, but it was gone. The forest was completely silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just me and the sound of my own heartbeat. I got back in my truck with shaky hands and drove to the next house. My scanner beeped with a message from the post office asking for my location update, but I could barely focus enough to respond. I kept checking my mirrors, looking for any sign of movement in the trees. When I got back to the post office that afternoon, I reported the sighting to Janet. She listened politely, then suggested it might have been a bear standing on its hind legs. Black bears do that sometimes when they're curious about something. But I'd seen plenty of bears in Alaska. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't watch you with obvious intelligence, and they don't step carefully behind trees to avoid being seen. This thing knew I was looking at it and deliberately hid from me. Saturday was my day off, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I drove out to Pine Ridge Road on my own time just to look around. I didn't find any new tracks, but I had the strangest feeling I was being watched the entire time. Monday morning, May 28th, I arrived at the post office to find giant footprints all around my mail truck. The thing had been there during the night, circling my vehicle like it was studying it. The prints went all the way around the truck twice, then led off toward the tree line behind the building. Janet was already there when I showed her the tracks. This time she couldn't dismiss them as easily. The prints were clearly visible in the gravel parking lot, pressed deep into the soft ground where the recent rain had made it muddy. "I'm calling the police," she said. "This has gone from weird to concerning." The state trooper who responded was Officer Martinez. He took photos of the tracks and filed a report, but I could tell he thought it was some kind of elaborate hoax. "Probably teenagers with fake feet," he said. "We see this stuff around tourist season." But I knew better. Teenagers don't make 18-inch footprints that sink 3 inches into packed gravel. And they definitely don't do it without leaving any other evidence. No tire tracks from getting to the post office, no other footprints, nothing. That day on my route, things escalated. I was driving along Pine Ridge Road when I heard heavy footsteps in the forest, keeping pace with my truck. At first I thought it might be a moose. They're big enough to make that kind of noise. But moose don't follow delivery trucks for miles. The footsteps stayed parallel to the road, maybe 50 feet into the tree line. Every time I stopped to make a delivery, the sounds would stop too. When I started driving again, they'd resume. Whatever was out there knew exactly what I was doing and was matching my movements. At the Kowalski house, I found their mailbox completely destroyed. The metal post had been twisted like a pretzel, and the box itself was crumpled into a ball. and the damage would have required incredible strength, more than any normal person could generate, even with tools. Mrs. Kowalski was home this time and was pretty upset about the mailbox. "It was fine yesterday evening when I got the newspaper," she said. "This happened overnight." I looked around the property and found those massive footprints everywhere. Around the destroyed mailbox, leading to and from the tree line, even right up to the house windows. Whatever had done this had spent time studying the property. Tuesday brought new problems. My handheld scanner started acting up. It would randomly beep and show error messages even when I wasn't using it. The GPS in my truck kept losing signal, even in areas where it normally worked fine. And my radio started picking up weird static that sounded almost like breathing. I was at Mr. Garrett's place when my truck decided to break down. The engine just died while I was parked in his driveway, and it wouldn't start again. The battery was fine, but something was wrong with the electrical system. All the dashboard lights were flashing randomly, and the radio was making that strange static sound. I called for a tow truck on my cell phone, but the call kept dropping. Finally got through on the third try and was told it would be at least an hour before they could reach me. Mr. Garrett invited me to wait inside, but I decided to stay with the truck. That's when I heard the trees crashing. Something big was moving through the forest about 100 yards away, snapping branches and pushing through the underbrush. The sound was getting closer, and I could hear heavy, deliberate footsteps between the crashes. Then it emerged from the tree line. The creature stepped out into the clearing about 50 feet from where I sat in my disabled truck. It was massive, definitely over 9 feet tall, and built like a linebacker. Dark brown, fur covered its entire body, and its face was somewhere between human and ape. But the eyes were completely human, brown and intelligent, and focused directly on me. We stared at each other, for what felt like forever but was probably only a few minutes. The creature didn't move aggressively, but it didn't back away either. It just studied me with those disturbingly human eyes, like it was trying to figure out what I was. I sat perfectly still, afraid that any sudden movement would trigger an attack. My bear spray was in the glove compartment, but I didn't dare reach for it. This thing was easily strong enough to tear my truck apart if it wanted to. Finally, it started walking toward me. Slow, careful steps that covered a lot of ground due to its size. When it got within 20 feet of the truck, it stopped and leaned down to look through the windows. Its face was only inches from the glass, and I could see every detail. The way its nostrils flared as it breathed, the texture of its fur, the obvious intelligence behind its eyes. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and walked back into the forest. By the time the tow truck arrived 30 minutes later, there was no sign it had ever been there except for the massive handprints on my windows. The tow truck driver was a local guy named Pete who'd been working these roads for 15 years. When he saw the handprints on my truck windows, his face went white. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "How big were those hands?" I held up my own hand next to one of the prints. My fingers barely reached halfway up the palm print. "Big enough," I said. Pete hooked up my truck and we drove back to town in silence. But I could see him checking his mirrors constantly, just like I'd been doing all week. The next day, I requested a transfer to an urban route. Janet didn't ask many questions. I think she was relieved to have the whole situation off her hands. The post office officially blamed the incidents on wildlife activity and equipment malfunctions due to environmental factors. But the story doesn't end there. 2 weeks after I switched routes, I found those massive footprints in my own backyard. The creature had somehow tracked me to my house in town, 15 miles from Pine Ridge Road. The prints led from the tree line behind my property right up to my back door. My wife and I moved to Anchorage a month later. I told her it was for better job opportunities, but the real reason was those intelligent brown eyes staring at me through my truck window. Whatever that thing was, it knew who I was and where I lived. I still work for the Postal Service, but now I stick to city routes with lots of people around. Sometimes I wonder if other mail carriers in remote areas have had similar experiences. Maybe the thing on Pine Ridge Road wasn't unique. Maybe there are others out there, watching from the forest edges, studying our routines and trying to understand what we are. If you're a mail carrier or anyone else who works alone in isolated areas, trust your instincts. If you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. And if you ever see footprints that are too big and too deep to be human, don't try to explain them away. Just get out of there and don't go back. Some things are better left alone in the wilderness where they belong. The Postal Service never investigated what happened on Pine Ridge Road. As far as I know, the route is still being covered by another carrier. I hope whoever took over my route is more careful than I was. And I hope they never have to look into those intelligent brown eyes and wonder what comes next, because I'm still wondering the same thing myself.